The Grand Council chamber of the Zephyrian Empire stretched out like a crystalline cathedral, its walls pulsing with bioluminescent veins that shifted from deep purple to angry crimson. Princess Lyralii stood at the center of the circular platform, her forearms folded in a gesture of resigned dignity while the council members' voices echoed around her like the chittering of angry insects. 17 cycles, High Counselor Vexthan's voice boomed through his translation device, the mechanical tone doing nothing to soften his contempt. 17 cycles of failed breeding attempts with the finest genetic specimens our empire has to offer, and, still the princess remains barren. Lyralii's silver skin flickered with patterns of suppressed emotion, the natural bioluminescence of her people betraying her inner turmoil despite her composed expression. Her large, opalescent eyes remained fixed on the floor as the council continued their deliberations about her fate as if she weren't standing right there. The bloodline must continue, Counselor Timetis added, her serpentine neck undulating as she spoke. The princess carries the genetic markers of the ancient Zephyrian royal house. Without offspring, a 1,000-year dynasty dies with her. Emperor Zalthar, Lyralii's father, sat upon the throne of stars with his massive frame radiating disappointment. His 6 arms moved in complex patterns as he spoke, each gesture weighted with imperial authority. We have exhausted every possibility within our empire. Our greatest geneticists, our most fertile nobles, even the sacred breeding chambers of the ancestral worlds, nothing has succeeded. The chamber fell silent except for the subtle humming of the bioluminescent walls and the quiet whisper of recycled atmosphere. Lyralii finally raised her head, meeting her father's gaze with the defiant spark that had made her such a formidable warrior before her reproductive failures had overshadowed all her achievements. Perhaps, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber with practiced royal authority, the fault lies not with me, but with the limited genetic diversity of our empire. We have interbred among the same noble houses for centuries. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled counselors. Such words bordered on heresy, questioning the purity of Zephyrian bloodlines that had conquered half the known galaxy. Silence, Zalthar commanded, though his tone suggested more weariness than anger. The matter has been decided. Since conventional methods have failed, we will pursue alternative arrangements. High Counselor Vexthan stepped forward, his mechanical legs clicking against the crystalline floor. The humans, he announced with undisguised revulsion, have recently established a small colony on the border world of Kepler 442b. Their species is known for its prolific reproductive capabilities, despite their primitive nature. Murmurs of disgust and fascination rippled through the chamber. Humans were barely considered sentient by most galactic civilizations, a young species that had only recently developed faster than light travel and still relied on crude chemical propulsion for most of their vessels. You propose to mate our princess with a human? Counselor Thymetus's voice dripped with horror and amusement in equal measure. It is a jest worthy of the ancient comedies, another counselor laughed. Send the barren princess to breed with the primitives. If she succeeds, we gain an heir with useful genetic diversity. If she fails, well. He shrugged with 2 of his 4 shoulders. The princess finds a new home among beings suited to her limitations. Lyralii felt the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest, but forced herself to remain silent. She had endured worse insults in recent years, and she understood the political calculus at work. Her failure to produce an heir had made her a liability to the empire. This arrangement would either solve the succession crisis or remove her from it entirely. The humans have expressed interest in establishing deeper diplomatic ties, Vexthan continued. We could frame this as a gesture of goodwill, a marriage alliance between our peoples. They would be honored to receive Zephyrian royalty, regardless of her deficiencies. Emperor Zalthar studied his daughter with eyes that had once looked upon her with pride and hope. Now she saw only calculation and barely concealed disappointment. What say you, princess? Will you accept this arrangement? Lyralii straightened to her full height, nearly 3 meters tall, her silver skin shifting to patterns of determined resolve. If it serves the empire, I will go to these humans. But I go as a princess of Zephyr, not as your discarded shame. I will not forget what I am, regardless of where fate leads me. The emperor nodded slowly. Very well. Preparations will be made immediately. You will depart within the lunar cycle. As the council began discussing the logistics of the arrangement, Lyralii allowed herself one moment of private grief. She thought of her childhood dreams of ruling alongside a noble mate, of raising strong children who would carry the Zephyrian legacy to new heights. Instead, she would be shipped off to a primitive world to serve as a curiosity for creatures barely removed from their evolutionary caves. 3 weeks later, Lyralii stood in the docking bay of the Imperial flagship, watching as the human colony ship grew larger in the viewscreen. The vessel was indeed primitive by Zephyrian standards, bulky, angular, and covered in what appeared to be metallic plates welded together with little regard for aesthetic beauty. It looked more like a flying scrapyard than a diplomatic transport. Princess, Captain Virith approached with the traditional bow of respect, though his tone carried the perfunctory quality that had become common among her former supporters. The human delegation has docked. They await your presence in Conference Bay 7. Lyralii nodded, smoothing the ceremonial robes that marked her as a royal daughter of Zephyr. The fabric was woven with threads of pure starlight, a treasure that these humans could probably never comprehend. She wondered if they would even recognize her status or simply see her as another alien curiosity. Conference Bay 7 had been prepared according to human environmental requirements, a startling revelation that these creatures required such specific atmospheric conditions to survive. The temperature had been lowered to what felt like Arctic conditions to Lyralii, and the atmosphere had been adjusted to accommodate the primitive gas mixture that humans breathed. 3 humans waited inside the bay, and Lyralii had to suppress her surprise at their appearance. Imperial intelligence reports had described humans as bipedal mammals with limited physical capabilities, but she hadn't been prepared for how small they were. The tallest among them barely reached her chest, and their compact frames looked almost fragile compared to the robust physicality of Zephyrian physiology. The lead human stepped forward, and Lyralii noted with interest that he moved with a confidence that seemed disproportionate to his size. His skin was darker than she had expected, a warm brown that reminded her of the volcanic sands of Zephyr's southern continent. His features were symmetrical and pleasant, with bright eyes that held an intelligence she hadn't anticipated. "Your Highness," he said in surprisingly fluent galactic standard, offering what she recognized as a human gesture of respect, a bow that was neither too deep nor too shallow. "I am Commander Marcus Chen of the Kepler colony. It is an honor beyond words to welcome you to our small corner of the galaxy." Lyralii found herself studying this Commander Chen with more interest than she had expected to feel. His manner suggested education and sophistication that contradicted the Empire's assessment of human primitiveness. More intriguingly, he looked at her without the mixture of pity and disgust that had become common among her own people. "Commander Chen," she replied, inclining her head in the formal acknowledgement due to a diplomatic representative. "I am Princess Lyralii of the Royal House of Zephyr. I come to your world in the spirit of alliance between our peoples." "The spirit of alliance," Chen repeated, and she caught something in his tone, a subtle understanding that suggested he was aware of the true nature of this arrangement. "We are honored by your presence, Princess. Our colony may be small and our world frontier rough, but we promise you will be treated with the respect due to your station." Behind him, the other 2 humans, a woman with hair the color of solar flares and a man whose skin was pale as starlight, watched the exchange with expressions of barely contained fascination. Lyralii realized that she was probably as exotic to them as they were to her. "Our ship is prepared for the journey to Kepler 442b, Chen continued. "The voyage will take approximately 6 standard days. We've done our best to accommodate Zephyrian environmental preferences in your quarters." As they made their way to the human vessel, Lyralii couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking toward an uncertain future. Behind her, the Imperial flagship would soon depart, carrying with it her last physical connection to the world and people who had shaped her entire existence. Ahead lay a primitive world inhabited by creatures her people considered barely evolved, where she would either find a way to salvage her legacy or fade into obscurity. The interior of the human ship was even more primitive than she had expected, with bare metal corridors and exposed conduits running along the walls like mechanical arteries. Yet there was something oddly appealing about the functional simplicity, honesty in design that contrasted sharply with the ornate complexity of Zephyrian architecture. "I know this must be difficult," Chen said quietly as they walked, his voice pitched for her alone.
leaving everything you know for an uncertain future among strangers.
But I want you to know that you're not alone here. We may be different species, but we understand something about starting over in a hostile universe.
Lyralei glanced at him with surprise.
In all her years of diplomatic training, she had never heard such direct acknowledgement of emotional reality from a first meeting.
Zephyrian protocol demanded layers of formal politeness that obscured genuine sentiment. Thank you, Commander. Your honesty is refreshing.
Marcus, he corrected with a smile that transformed his entire face.
If we're going to be neighbors, we might as well skip the excessive formality. Unless you prefer your highness for everything?
Lyralei, she found herself saying before she could think better of it.
Among friends, I am simply Lyralei.
They passed through sections of the ship where other humans paused in their work to watch her pass.
Unlike the calculated observation of the Zephyrian court, their stares held genuine curiosity and, what seemed like, excitement.
She realized that to them, she was probably as remarkable as any mythological being, a princess from the stars come to live among them. Her quarters turned out to be surprisingly thoughtful, with environmental controls adjusted for Zephyrian comfort and a viewing port that offered an unobstructed view of space.
Someone had even attempted to replicate some elements of Zephyrian aesthetic design, though the execution was charmingly crude.
We did our best, Marcus said, noting her examination of the room. I'm sure it's nothing like what you're accustomed to, but it's perfect, Lyralei interrupted, and was surprised to realize she meant it. The effort that had gone into making her feel welcome touched something deep in her chest that had been cold for too long.
Thank you. All of you. As Marcus left her to settle in, Lyralei moved to the viewing port and watched as the Imperial flagship began its journey back to Zephyrian space.
Soon it was just another point of light among the stars, indistinguishable from the billions of other distant suns. For the first time in years, she felt something other than shame and disappointment. She felt curious about what lay ahead, and, perhaps, though she barely dared acknowledge it, hopeful. These humans might be primitive by galactic standards, but they possessed something her advanced civilization seemed to have lost: genuine kindness to strangers. The ship shuddered slightly as it engaged its faster-than-light drive, carrying her toward whatever future awaited among the humans of Kepler 442b. Lyralei closed her eyes and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that this exile might become something more than punishment.
Perhaps it might even become a new beginning. 6 days in hyperspace passed more quickly than Lyralei had expected.
She found herself spending most of her time in the ship's observation lounge, fascinated by the humans' casual approach to space travel. Unlike Zephyrian vessels where crew members maintain formal hierarchies and ritual protocols, the human ship buzzed with informal conversations and collaborative problem-solving that seemed remarkably efficient. Marcus had taken to joining her for meals, and their conversations ranged from comparative stellar cartography to the philosophical differences between their species' approaches to governance. Lyralei was consistently surprised by the depth of his knowledge and the sophistication of human political thought, despite their relatively recent emergence onto the galactic stage. "Tell me about your colony," she asked during their final meal aboard the ship.
"What drew humans to such a remote world?"
Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression growing thoughtful.
"Freedom, mostly. Earth is crowded. Regulated.
Every decision has to pass through 17 different bureaucratic layers before anything gets done. Kepler 442b offered us a chance to build something new without the weight of 10,000 years of tradition holding us back." "You speak of tradition as a burden," Lyralei observed.
"My people consider it our greatest strength." "Maybe that's the difference between a young species and an old one," Marcus replied. "We haven't had time to accumulate enough tradition to feel its weight yet. Ask me again in a few thousand years."
When the ship finally dropped out of hyperspace, Lyralei pressed her face to the viewing port and gasped. Kepler 442b hung before them like a blue and green jewel, its surface swirled with white clouds that reminded her of her childhood drawings of paradise. 2 small moons orbited the planet in a graceful dance, their surfaces scarred with the impact craters that spoke of a young and dynamic system. "It's beautiful," she whispered, and meant it. The world below looked nothing like the harsh, crystalline landscapes of Zephyr with their purple skies and metallic forests.
This place looked alive in a way that spoke to something deep in her genetic memory. "Wait until you see it from the surface," Marcus said, moving to stand beside her. "The first time I watched a Kepler sunrise, I understood why our ancestors wrote poetry about the beauty of worlds." The colonial settlement of New Geneva sprawled across a river valley surrounded by rolling hills covered in what humans called grass, a simple green plant that grew in vast, undifferentiated carpets instead of the complex geometric patterns favored by Zephyrian vegetation. The buildings were functional and unpretentious, constructed from locally quarried stone and processed timber that gave the entire settlement a warm, organic feeling. Lyreliai's arrival created quite a stir among the colonists. Word had spread about the Zephyrian princess who was coming to live among them, and curious faces peered from windows and doorways as Marcus led her through the settlement's main street. Children ran alongside their small procession, their excited chatter filling the air with an energy that reminded Lyrelii of festival days on Zephyr. "Princess! Princess!" A small human child broke away from the group and ran directly toward her, arms outstretched in a gesture of pure joy. Without thinking, Lyrelii knelt and caught the child in her lower arms, lifting the tiny human with careful gentleness. "Hello, little one," she said softly, studying the child's face with wonder. Human children were even smaller than she had imagined, with enormous eyes and expressions of fearless curiosity that seemed to define their species. "Are you really from another planet?" the child asked, reaching up to touch the bioluminescent patterns that danced across Lyrelii's silver skin. "I am," Lyrelii replied. "And what is your name, brave explorer?" "Sarah," the child announced proudly. "Are you going to live here with us now? Will you be our princess too?" Before Lyrelii could answer, the child's mother appeared, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Sarah! Come here right now." "I'm so sorry, Your Highness." "She's at that age where she has no fear of anything." "Please," Lyrelii said, gently setting Sarah down but keeping one hand on the child's shoulder. "There is no offense. I find her curiosity refreshing." As they continued through the settlement, Lyrelii was struck by the informal democracy that seemed to govern human social interaction. People approached her with questions and offers of assistance without the complex protocols that would have been required for approaching royalty on Zephyr. They treated her with respect, but it was the respect given to an honored guest rather than the fearful deference shown to imperial authority. Her new residence turned out to be a modest house on the settlement's outskirts, constructed from the same warm stone as the other buildings but modified with Zephyrian environmental controls. A team of human engineers had worked for months to create a living space that could accommodate her physiological needs while maintaining the aesthetic harmony of the human settlement. "We weren't sure about the interior layout," Marcus explained as he showed her through the rooms. "Zephyrian architecture isn't exactly covered in standard colonial engineering manuals. We did our best with the cultural databases we could access." Lyrelii moved through the space with growing amazement. Every detail showed evidence of careful research and thoughtful consideration. The ceiling heights accommodated her stature, the doorways were wide enough for her forearms, and the lighting could be adjusted to the bioluminescent frequencies that Zephyrians found comforting. Most remarkably, someone had attempted to recreate the flowing, organic lines that characterized Zephyrian design sensibilities. "This is extraordinary," she said, running her hands along the wall curve that perfectly mimicked the feel of grown architecture. "How did you achieve this level of accuracy?" Marcus looked pleased but slightly embarrassed. "We had help. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, our xenobiologist, spent 6 months studying every piece of Zephyrian cultural information she could access. She said understanding how a species designs their living spaces tells you more about their psychology than any formal diplomatic briefing." "I would like to meet this Dr. Warren," Lyrelii said. "Her insight into my people's aesthetic preferences is remarkable." "Actually," Marcus said, checking a device on his wrist, "she should be arriving for dinner in about an hour. Along with Mayor Rodriguez and a few other folks who've been looking forward to meeting you." "I hope you don't mind, we thought a small welcome gathering might be nice." The dinner party that evening proved to be unlike any diplomatic gathering Lyrelii had ever experienced. Instead of the formal ritual courses and carefully scripted conversation that characterized Zephyrian state dinners,
the humans gathered around a large wooden table laden with dishes prepared from local ingredients and shared stories with the casual intimacy of old friends. Dr. Warren turned out to be a woman in her middle years with silver-streaked hair and eyes that sparkled with insatiable curiosity. She peppered Lyralii with questions about Zephyrian biology, culture, and history with the enthusiasm of someone who had found their life's passion in understanding the universe's diversity.
I have to ask, Dr. Warren said during a pause in the conversation, what's it like to have 4 arms? I mean, from a neurological standpoint, how does your brain coordinate that level of fine motor control?
Lyralii demonstrated by picking up 4 different objects simultaneously and manipulating them in independent patterns.
It's difficult to explain to a bipedal species, she said with a smile. For us, using only 2 arms would feel as limiting as trying to walk on only 1 leg would for you.
Mayor Rodriguez, a robust woman with laugh lines around her eyes, leaned forward with interest.
And the bioluminescence? Can you control it consciously, or is it purely emotional response?
Both, Lyralii replied, allowing patterns of soft blue light to dance across her skin in demonstration. Basic emotional states trigger automatic responses, but we can also create controlled patterns for communication. It's somewhat like your facial expressions, but visible from much greater distances. As the evening progressed, Lyralii found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in years. These humans asked their questions with genuine curiosity rather than the calculating interest that characterized Zephyrian court interactions. They wanted to understand her as a person, not just as a political asset or diplomatic liability. I have to admit, she said during a lull in the conversation, I expected this transition to be much more difficult.
Your people have shown me kindness that goes far beyond diplomatic necessity.
Marcus exchanged glances with the other humans before responding.
Lyralii, we should be honest about something. We know this isn't really a diplomatic marriage alliance. Word gets around, even to frontier colonies.
We know you were sent here because of reproductive issues. Lyralii felt her skin flush with patterns of embarrassment and defensive anger.
I see. And you find my situation amusing?
No, Dr. Warren said firmly.
We find it tragic. A civilization that would exile someone of your obvious intelligence and capabilities because of biological factors beyond your control? That's not advanced thinking, that's primitive tribalism dressed up in fancy technology.
You're welcome here for as long as you want to stay, Mayor Rodriguez added. Not as some kind of fertility experiment, but as someone we'd be honored to have as part of our community. If you choose to build a life here, it will be on your terms, not as fulfillment of some imperial arrangement.
For a long moment, Lyralii couldn't speak.
The simple acceptance in their voices touched something deep in her chest that had been wounded for so long she had forgotten it existed. These humans, barely more than children in galactic terms, offered her something her ancient and sophisticated civilization had withdrawn, unconditional acceptance of her worth as an individual.
Thank you, she finally managed to say. Thank you.
The weeks that followed established a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Lyralii found herself taking long walks through the settlement each morning, observing the daily rhythms of human colonial life. The colonists went about their work with an efficiency born of necessity but also with a cheerfulness that seemed to be characteristic of their species. She began contributing to the settlement's activities, using her advanced education to help solve engineering problems and her diplomatic training to mediate the occasional disputes that arose in any community. The colonists accepted her contributions with the same casual appreciation they showed for any productive community member. Marcus had become her closest friend among the humans, and their daily conversations ranged from technical discussions about terraforming techniques to philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness and civilization. She found his perspective endlessly fascinating. He possessed the optimism of a young species combined with the thoughtfulness of someone who had seen enough of the universe to appreciate its complexity. One evening, as they sat on the porch of her house watching the dual moonrise paint the sky in shades of silver and gold, Marcus asked the question she had been dreading.
The marriage arrangement, he said carefully. How do you want to handle it?
I mean, we both know why your people sent you here, and we both know what they expect to happen. Lyralii had been dreading this conversation, but his direct approach made it easier to address honestly.
I don't know, she admitted.
Part of me wants to prove them wrong, to show that I can succeed where their perfect genetic matches failed.
But another part of me fears that I'll only confirm their assessment of my inadequacy. What if, Marcus said slowly, we approach this as friends helping each other rather than as some kind of imperial breeding program?
No pressure, no expectations beyond what we choose for ourselves. Lyralii studied his profile in the moonlight, noting the way the dual illumination highlighted the strong lines of his jaw and the thoughtful expression that seemed to define him.
You would do that? Risk your time and emotional investment on someone who might be incapable of giving you children?
Lyralii, Marcus said, turning to meet her eyes directly, I would consider myself fortunate to share any part of my life with someone as remarkable as you, children or no children. You're brilliant, kind, funny when you let your guard down, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with biology. If we end up together, it will be because we choose each other, not because some imperial council decided we should breed. In the soft glow of the alien moons, surrounded by the night sounds of a world that was slowly becoming home, Lyralii felt something shift in her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about genetic compatibility or dynastic obligations. She was simply thinking about the warm, intelligent man beside her and the way his presence made her feel valued for who she was rather than what she might produce. I would like that, she said softly. To choose, rather than simply fulfill obligations. Marcus reached over and took one of her hands in both of his, the gesture simple and honest.
Then, that's what we'll do. We'll take our time, get to know each other properly, and see where it leads.
As they sat together under the alien stars, Lyralii allowed herself to hope that perhaps her exile might become something far more precious than anything she had lost. 6 months into her new life on Kepler 442b, Lyralii had discovered something she never expected: contentment. Not the restless satisfaction of duty fulfilled that had characterized her royal years, but a deep sense of belonging that grew stronger with each passing day. Her relationship with Marcus had evolved naturally from friendship to something deeper. They had taken their time, as he had promised, learning each other's customs and quirks without the pressure of imperial expectations. Their courtship had been a revelation, gentle, respectful, filled with laughter and genuine discovery rather than the calculated negotiations that passed for romance among Zephyrian nobility. The wedding ceremony had been a beautiful blend of both cultures. Dr. Warren had worked with Lyralii to incorporate traditional Zephyrian bonding rituals into a human celebration, creating something entirely new that honored both their heritages. The entire settlement had participated, turning the occasion into a community festival that lasted 3 days and featured foods from both worlds. Now, as Lyralii stood in the garden behind their shared home, watching Marcus tend to the hybrid plants they had been cultivating together, she marveled at how profoundly her life had changed. The experimental garden was a perfect metaphor for their relationship: earth vegetables growing alongside Zephyrian flowering vines, each species thriving in ways that wouldn't have been possible alone. The quantum tomatoes are responding beautifully to the Zephyrian soil enhancement, Marcus called out, his voice filled with the enthusiasm that made him such an effective colonial administrator. Your people's agricultural techniques are going to revolutionize food production here. Lyralii smiled, moving to join him among the carefully tended rows. Her forearms allowed her to work with an efficiency that Marcus found endlessly amusing, and his two-armed approach forced him to develop strategies that often proved more elegant than her multi-limbed solutions. It's not just the techniques, she replied, kneeling beside him to examine the thriving plants. It's the combination. Human intuition and Zephyrian precision. Your species has an understanding of biological harmony that my people have forgotten in our pursuit of control. They worked together in companionable silence until the calm unit in Marcus's pocket chimed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read the display, and Lyralii felt a familiar twist of anxiety in her chest. What is it? She asked. Long-range sensors have detected a Zephyrian Imperial vessel approaching the system, Marcus said grimly. ETA approximately 18 hours. They're requesting permission to make Planetfall 4 diplomatic consultation with you. Lyralii's silver skin flickered with patterns of distress despite her attempt to remain calm. She had known this day would eventually come, but she had hoped for more time. More time to prove herself, to build the life she had found here, too. They're coming to evaluate my success, she said quietly.
To determine whether the arrangement has achieved its intended purpose.
Marcus set down his gardening tools and moved to wrap his arms around her, a gesture that still amazed her with its simple comfort.
Hey, he said softly. Whatever they want, whatever they expect, we face it together. You're not alone in this anymore.
That evening, the settlement's leadership gathered in the community center to discuss the impending arrival. The atmosphere was tense, with undercurrents of protectiveness and defiance that surprised Lyralii with their intensity. These humans had accepted her as family, and they were prepared to defend her as such.
What exactly are we dealing with here? Mayor Rodriguez asked bluntly. How much authority does this imperial vessel have over our princess?
Technically, Lyralii replied, struggling to keep her voice steady, I remain a subject of the Zephyrian Empire.
If they determine that the arrangement has failed to meet their objectives, they could demand my return. And, if we refuse?
Dr. Warren asked with the sharp edge that appeared in her voice when she encountered something that offended her scientific sensibilities. The Zephyrian Empire has maintained galactic dominance for over a millennium, Lyralii said.
Open resistance would be inadvisable.
Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his expression thoughtful.
But, what if the arrangement hasn't failed? What if it succeeded beyond their expectations? Lyralii looked at him with confusion.
Marcus, we've been married for only 3 months. Even if conception were possible, it would be far too early to. She stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned. The realization hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending cascades of bioluminescent shock across her skin.
Oh, she whispered. Oh my. Dr.
Warren was already reaching for her medical scanner, her scientific excitement barely contained.
When did you last have a standard biological cycle check? Zephyrian reproduction might operate on completely different timescales than human pregnancy.
I haven't been monitoring, Lyralii admitted, her voice shaking.
After so many failures, I stopped paying attention to the signs.
The medical examination that followed was thorough and conducted with the excited precision of a groundbreaking discovery. Dr. Warren's equipment, enhanced with Zephyrian diagnostic protocols, painted a picture that left everyone in the room stunned. Congratulations, Dr. Warren announced with a grin that threatened to split her face.
You're approximately 12 weeks pregnant.
And, from what I can determine, the fetal development is proceeding perfectly, a healthy hybrid of both species. The silence that followed was profound. Lyralii stared at the diagnostic display showing the tiny life growing within her, unable to process the magnitude of what she was seeing. After 17 cycles of failure, after being declared genetically incompatible with reproduction, she was carrying a child.
How, she whispered. My people's greatest geneticists couldn't achieve conception. How is this possible?
Dr. Warren's expression grew thoughtful as she studied the detailed scans.
I have a theory, but you might not like it. The problem wasn't with your reproductive capabilities, it was with genetic compatibility. Zephyrian noble bloodlines have become too refined, too genetically similar. You needed genetic diversity, not genetic perfection. You're saying my people's obsession with bloodline purity actually caused the reproductive failures? Lyralii asked, her voice carrying a mix of wonder and bitter irony. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Human genetic diversity, combined with your Zephyrian physiology, created the perfect conditions for successful conception. Your child is going to be something entirely new, the best of both species. Marcus took Lyralii's hands in his eyes bright with tears of joy and wonder. We're going to have a baby, he said softly, as if testing the words for their reality. We're going to have a baby, Lyralii repeated, her own voice filled with amazement.
A living child. An heir to both our worlds.
The implications of this discovery rippled through the room like expanding shockwaves.
This child wouldn't just be a personal miracle, it would be proof that the rigid genetic hierarchies of the galactic civilizations were fundamentally flawed. A demonstration that hybrid vigor could triumph over purebred stagnation.
The Imperial delegation is going to be very interested in this development, Mayor Rodriguez observed with considerable understatement.
Interested and, probably confused, Dr. Warren added. This outcome challenges their basic assumptions about genetic superiority. They sent you here expecting failure, and, instead they're getting a success that proves their own limitations. Lyralei felt a complex mixture of emotions coursing through her. Joy at the prospect of motherhood warred with anxiety about the political implications. This child would be born into a universe where hybrid children had no precedent, no established place in the rigid hierarchies that governed galactic civilization. What do we tell them? She asked. How do we present this in a way that protects our child and our community? Marcus squeezed her hands gently. We tell them the truth. That love and acceptance succeeded where force and calculation failed. That the future belongs to cooperation, not domination. The next 18 hours passed in a blur of preparation and nervous anticipation. The entire settlement mobilized to present their best face to the Imperial delegation, while privately preparing for whatever demands or complications might arise. Everyone understood that this visit would determine not just Lyralei's future, but, potentially, the relationship between humans and the broader galactic community. When the Zephyrian vessel finally appeared in the sky above New Geneva, it was impossible to mistake it for anything but what it was: a display of Imperial power designed to intimidate and impress. The ship was 10 times larger than anything in the human fleet, its crystalline hull reflecting the sunlight in patterns that spoke of technology far beyond current human capabilities. Lyralei stood at Marcus's side as the Imperial shuttle descended toward the settlement's landing pad, her pregnancy still too early to be visible but her awareness of the life within her coloring every thought and emotion. This child would be born into a universe where its very existence challenged the established order. Ready? Marcus asked, offering her his arm in the formal manner they had practiced. Ready, she replied, though her skin flickered with patterns of uncertainty. Whatever happens, we face it together. The shuttle's doors opened with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere, and High Counselor Vexthan emerged in all his mechanical magnificence. Behind him came a full diplomatic party, their expressions ranging from curious to openly disdainful as they surveyed the primitive human settlement. Princess Lyralei, Vexthan announced in his artificially enhanced voice, you appear to have adapted well to your circumstances. We trust your time among the humans has been instructive. It has been transformative, Lyralei replied carefully, falling back on diplomatic protocols while her heart raced with nervous energy. Indeed. We have come to evaluate the success of this arrangement and determine the next phase of your service to the Empire. I trust you have positive developments to report? Lyralei exchanged a glance with Marcus, drawing strength from his steady presence. I do, High Counselor. More positive than anyone could have anticipated. Vexthan's mechanical features shifted into what might have been amusement. Oh? And what exactly has this primitive world accomplished that the greatest facilities of the Empire could not? Lyralei straightened to her full height, her skin beginning to glow with patterns of determination and pride. High Counselor, I am pleased to inform you that I am 12 weeks pregnant with a healthy child, a successful hybrid of human and Zephyrian genetics. The silence that followed was absolute. The Imperial delegation stared at her in shock, their expressions cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been fear. This was not the outcome they had expected, and its implications were staggering. Impossible, Vexthan finally managed. Our geneticists determined that successful hybrid reproduction was biologically impossible. Your geneticists, Dr. Warren interjected, stepping forward with the confidence of someone presenting groundbreaking research, failed to account for the benefits of genetic diversity. Princess Lyralei's reproductive success demonstrates that hybrid vigor can overcome the limitations of purebred genetics. You are suggesting, another counselor said slowly, that our bloodline purity has caused our reproductive difficulties? I'm not suggesting it, Dr. Warren replied firmly. I'm proving it. The genetic data is conclusive. This child represents the future, stronger, healthier, and more adaptable than either parent species alone. Lyralei watched the Imperial delegation struggle to process this information. Everything about their worldview was built on the assumption of Zephyrian genetic superiority. The idea that mixing with primitive humans could produce superior results challenged their most fundamental beliefs. This child, Vexton said slowly, would be heir to both worlds. A bridge between species. The political implications are. He paused, his mechanical mind working through possibilities that had never existed before. Revolutionary, Lyralii finished for him. This child proves that the future lies in cooperation and diversity, not in isolation and genetic purity. The question is whether the Empire is wise enough to embrace this future or cling to the limitations of the past. As the Imperial delegation huddled in urgent consultation, Lyralii felt Marcus take her hand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Their child would be born into a universe where hybrid vigor had triumphed over genetic prejudice, where love had succeeded where force had failed. The future was uncertain, but, for the first time in her life, Lyralii was certain that uncertainty was exactly where the greatest possibilities lay. The Imperial delegation's private conference lasted 6 hours. Through the windows of the community center, Lyralii could see the Zephyrian officials engaged in heated discussion, their bioluminescent patterns flashing in rapid, agitated sequences that suggested fierce debate. Meanwhile, the human settlement went about its daily business with the determined normalcy that characterized her adopted people's approach to crisis. Marcus had not left her side throughout the wait, and Dr. Warren had taken it upon herself to compile a comprehensive genetic analysis that would support their case. The document was a masterpiece of scientific precision, detailing exactly how human genetic diversity had overcome the reproductive limitations that plagued purebred Zephyrian bloodlines. Whatever they decide, Marcus said quietly as they watched the sun set behind the settlement's hills, we're not letting them take you away from here. This is your home now, and that child is as much human as it is Zephyrian. Lyralii squeezed his hand, her skin flickering with patterns of gratitude and determination. I know. But, we must be strategic about this. If we antagonize them too directly, they could bring the full weight of the Empire against this colony. I won't let my people hurt yours because of choices I've made. Our choices, Marcus corrected firmly. This isn't your burden alone anymore. Before Lyralii could respond, the community center's doors opened and High Counselor Vexton entered, accompanied by the full Imperial delegation. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but the rapid patterns of light playing across their skin suggested emotions barely held in check. Princess Lyralii, Vexton began, his mechanical voice carrying formal authority. After extensive consultation, the Imperial Council has reached a decision regarding your situation and the implications of your success. Lyralii rose to her full height, drawing on years of diplomatic training to project calm confidence despite the anxiety churning in her chest. I await the Empire's wisdom, High Counselor. Your reproductive success represents an unprecedented development that requires careful consideration. The genetic data provided by your human associates suggests possibilities that our own scientists had not previously explored. Vexton paused, his optical sensors focusing intently on her. The Empire proposes the following arrangement: you will return with us immediately for proper Imperial medical care during your pregnancy. Your child will be born on Zephyr and raised according to royal protocol. In recognition of the human contribution to this success, your mate will be granted the status of Imperial consort and permitted to accompany you. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Lyralii felt her heart sink as she recognized the elegant trap the proposal represented. Technically generous, it would nonetheless separate her from the community that had become her true home and place her child firmly under Imperial control. And, if I refuse, she asked quietly. Then, you will be considered in violation of your Imperial obligations, with all the consequences that entails. Vexton's tone remained neutral, but the threat was unmistakable. Marcus stepped forward, his expression calm but his voice carrying the steel that made him such an effective leader. With respect, High Counselor, you seem to be missing a crucial point. Princess Lyralii's success didn't happen because of superior Zephyrian genetics or Imperial medical facilities. It happened here, in this community, because she found acceptance and love instead of pressure and judgment. Your point being? Vexton inquired. My point being that if you want to replicate this success, you need to understand what actually caused it. Dragging her back to an environment that created the problem in the first place seems counterproductive. Dr.
Warren moved to join them, her arms full of data tablets and her expression bright with scientific enthusiasm. If I may, High Counselor, there are some additional factors you should consider before making any final decisions. She activated a holographic display that filled the air with complex genetic charts and biological models.
The successful pregnancy isn't just a one-time anomaly.
Our analysis suggests that hybrid offspring will consistently show superior genetic stability, enhanced immune responses, and increased adaptability compared to either parent species alone. Furthermore, Dr. Warren continued, her excitement building as she warmed to her subject, this isn't limited to human Zephyrian crosses.
The principle of hybrid vigor suggests that genetic mixing between any sufficiently diverse species could produce similar benefits.
You're not looking at a single successful pregnancy, you're looking at the potential solution to the reproductive crisis affecting multiple galactic civilizations. The Imperial delegation exchanged rapid glances, their bioluminescent patterns shifting into frequencies that Lyralii recognized as intense scientific curiosity mixed with political calculation.
You are proposing, another counselor said slowly, that interspecies breeding programs could address the fertility problems that have plagued our noble houses for generations?
I'm proposing, Dr. Warren replied with the confidence of someone who had spent months analyzing the data, that genetic diversity is the key to reproductive health across all species. The isolation and inbreeding that characterizes most galactic civilizations has created the very problems you're trying to solve.
Lyralii watched the Imperial delegation process this information, understanding the enormous implications of what Dr. Warren was suggesting.
If hybrid vigor could solve the reproductive crises affecting multiple worlds, it would revolutionize galactic civilization.
It would also completely undermine the genetic hierarchies that maintain the current power structures.
Such a program, Vexton said carefully, would require extensive research and careful implementation. It would need to be overseen by someone with demonstrated expertise in interspecies genetics and a deep understanding of the cultural sensitivities involved. Someone like Dr. Warren, Lyralii interjected, beginning to understand the direction of the conversation. Working in partnership with Zephyrian scientists to develop protocols and best practices. And, conducted in an environment where successful interspecies relationships have already been established, Marcus added, his diplomatic instincts recognizing the opportunity being presented. An environment like this colony, where different species have learned to work together as equals. The pieces of a larger picture were falling into place. What had begun as Lyralii's personal exile could become the foundation for a new approach to galactic civilization, one based on cooperation and diversity rather than domination and purity.
You are proposing, Vexton said, his mechanical voice betraying a hint of what might have been excitement, that this human colony become a research center for interspecies genetic compatibility studies?
I'm proposing, Lyralii said, her confidence growing as she recognized the brilliant solution taking shape, that we establish a new model for galactic civilization. A place where different species can live and work together as equals, where genetic diversity is celebrated rather than feared, and where the future is built through cooperation rather than conquest. The Kepler Institute for Interspecies Studies, Dr. Warren suggested, practically glowing with enthusiasm. A joint human Zephyrian research facility dedicated to advancing interspecies cooperation and genetic health. The Imperial delegation fell silent, their internal communication systems undoubtedly working overtime as they processed the political and scientific implications. This proposal offered them a way to save face while embracing the revolutionary possibilities that Lyralii's pregnancy represented. Such an undertaking would require significant Imperial investment, Vexton observed.
Advanced medical facilities, research laboratories, qualified personnel from across the galaxy. And it would require someone to oversee the project, another counselor added. Someone with royal authority and demonstrated success in interspecies cooperation.
Lyralii felt her heart leap as she recognized the offer being extended. Not exile or forced return, but the opportunity to create something entirely new. A chance to transform her personal success into a foundation for galactic change. Princess Lyralii, Vexton said formally, the Empire hereby appoints you as Imperial Director of Interspecies Genetic Research, with full authority to establish and oversee the Kepler Institute. Your mandate will be to develop protocols for successful interspecies cooperation and reproduction, with the goal of addressing the reproductive crises affecting multiple galactic civilizations. I accept, Lyralii replied without hesitation, on the condition that the Institute be established as a truly collaborative effort between equal partners. Human insights and Zephyrian resources, working together to benefit all species. Agreed, Vexthan said, and, for the first time since his arrival, his mechanical features shifted into what might have been a smile. The Empire has always valued innovation, Princess. Your success here suggests that innovation may require embracing approaches we had not previously considered. As the formal agreements were concluded and plans began for the massive undertaking ahead, Lyralii found herself marveling at how completely her life had transformed. What had begun as shameful exile had become the foundation for revolutionary change. Her personal happiness had evolved into a catalyst for galactic transformation. That evening, as she and Marcus walked through their garden under the alien stars, she reflected on the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. The child growing within her would be born not as a curiosity or an experiment, but as the first citizen of a new kind of civilization, one where diversity was strength and cooperation was wisdom. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked, his arm around her shoulders as they contemplated the future stretching ahead of them. I don't think anyone could be ready for what we're about to attempt, Lyralii replied honestly. But, I know I want to try. I want our child to grow up in a universe where being different is celebrated, not condemned. Then, that's the universe we'll build, Marcus said with the quiet confidence that had first attracted her to him. One step at a time, one partnership at a time, until the whole galaxy looks like this little colony. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, unchanged by the revolutionary decisions being made on the small world below. But, Lyralii knew that those stars would soon shine down on a very different galaxy, one where the rigid hierarchies of the past would give way to the collaborative possibilities of the future. The child within her stirred, as if responding to the momentous changes surrounding its development. In a few short months, this baby would be born into a universe transformed by its very existence. It would be the first of a new generation that would know no boundaries between species, no limitations imposed by genetic prejudice. As they returned to their home, which would soon become the headquarters for the most ambitious interspecies project in galactic history, Lyralii felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had been sent here as a failure, but she was building the future as a pioneer. The greatest adventures, she reflected, often began with what seemed like the greatest disasters. 2 years later, Lyralii stood in the observation deck of the newly completed Kepler Institute for Interspecies Studies, watching ships from across the galaxy descend toward the planet's surface. What had once been a small human colony was now the most important research center in known space, where representatives from dozens of species came to study the revolutionary principles of interspecies cooperation. In her arms, 18-month-old Elena gurgled happily, her large eyes a perfect blend of human brown and Zephyrian silver, tracking the movement of the ships with fascination. The child was a living testament to the success of the Institute's mission, displaying the enhanced intelligence, physical resilience, and emotional adaptability that characterized hybrid offspring. The Altarian delegation has just arrived, Marcus announced as he joined them, his own arms full of reports from the various research projects currently underway. Dr. Warren thinks their reproductive physiology might be compatible with both human and Zephyrian genetics. If she's right, we could be looking at trispecies hybrid possibilities. Lyralii smiled, adjusting Elena in her arms as the child reached toward the window with hands that already showed the promise of forearmed dexterity. Elena will grow up in a universe where such possibilities are normal rather than miraculous. The Institute had grown far beyond anyone's initial projections. What had begun as a single research facility now encompassed multiple campuses, with residential areas designed to accommodate the needs of dozens of different species. The success of the Human-Zephyrian partnership had inspired similar collaborative efforts throughout the galaxy, challenging the rigid segregation that had characterized interstellar civilization for millennia. Princess, Dr. Warren's voice came through the communication system, barely containing her excitement. Could you come to Laboratory 7? We've just gotten the results from the latest genetic compatibility study, and you're not going to believe what we've discovered. As they made their way through the Institute's corridors, Lyralii marveled at the diversity surrounding them.
Crystalline beings from the Andorian system worked alongside insectoid researchers from the Vega colonies.
Gaseous entities in specialized containment suits collaborated with silicon-based intelligences whose thought processes operated on completely different temporal scales. Laboratory 7 buzzed with activity as species that had never before worked together shared data and theories. At the center of it all, Dr. Warren stood before a massive holographic display showing genetic compatibility matrices for 47 different sapient species. "Look at this," Dr. Warren said, her voice filled with wonder. "We've identified 17 different compatibility clusters, groups of species whose genetics are not only compatible but actually enhance each other when combined."
The reproductive crisis isn't unique to the Zephyrians. It's been affecting advanced civilizations across the galaxy as they became more genetically isolated. The implications were staggering. The data suggested that genetic diversity wasn't just beneficial for reproduction, it was essential for the long-term survival of sapient species. The rigid caste systems and species segregation that had characterized galactic civilization weren't just socially limiting, they were biologically destructive. More importantly, Dr. Warren continued, activating another section of the display, we've identified optimal genetic combinations that could produce offspring with capabilities neither parent species possesses alone. Enhanced longevity, improved resistance to radiation and environmental toxins, expanded sensory ranges, increased cognitive flexibility. Elena chose that moment to babble something that sounded remarkably like a question in Zephyrian mathematical notation, causing every researcher in the room to turn and stare at the child in amazement. "She's 18 months old," Marcus said with the bemused pride of a father whose child consistently exceeded expectations. "And yesterday she demonstrated understanding of quantum mechanics principles that most graduate students struggle with." Hybrid vigor in action, Dr. Warren observed with scientific satisfaction. Elena represents just the beginning of what's possible when we embrace genetic diversity instead of fearing it. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission from the galactic core.
Lyralii activated the holographic communication system, and Emperor Zalthar's image appeared in the laboratory, his massive form radiating an authority that could still make her feel like a nervous daughter. "Princess Lyralii," her father's voice carried across the light years between them, "the Imperial Council has reviewed the latest reports from your institute.
The results exceed our most optimistic projections."
"Thank you, Father," Lyralii replied, automatically falling into the formal protocols that had governed their relationship for so many years.
"The research teams have made remarkable progress in a very short time." "Indeed. Which brings me to the purpose of this communication.
The Empire formally requests that you return to Zephyr to establish a sister institute in the Imperial capital. The noble houses are experiencing unprecedented demand for genetic diversity consultation, and several have already produced successful hybrid offspring following your protocols." Lyralii felt Marcus tense beside her, and she understood his concern. The offer was clearly intended as an honor, but it would mean leaving the collaborative environment they had built on Kepler 442b for the rigid hierarchies of Imperial society. "With respect, Father, I believe the Institute serves the galaxy best by remaining here, where interspecies cooperation is the norm rather than the exception. However, we would be honored to establish a research partnership with Imperial scientists and provide consultation services for anyone who requests them." Emperor Zalthar's expression shifted through patterns that Lyralii recognized as approval mixed with paternal pride.
"Spoken like a true diplomat. Very well. The Empire accepts your proposal for partnership rather than relocation."
The transmission ended, leaving the laboratory buzzing with excited conversation about the political implications. Official Imperial recognition would open doors throughout the galaxy, legitimizing the Institute's work and encouraging more species to participate in the research. "Dr. Warren," Lyralii said, turning to address the woman who had become not just a colleague but a dear friend, "how quickly could we expand our facilities to accommodate full-scale interspecies breeding programs for all 47 compatibility clusters?" Dr. Warren's eyes lit up with the kind of scientific enthusiasm that had driven her to spend months studying alien architecture for the comfort of a single refugee. "Give me 6 months and unlimited funding, and I'll build you a facility that can serve the entire galaxy." As plans began to take shape for the massive expansion, Lyralei found herself thinking about the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years ago, she had been a failure, a princess who couldn't fulfill her most basic obligation to her bloodline. Now she was the architect of a revolution that was reshaping galactic civilization. Elena babbled again, this time producing sounds that seemed to blend human phonemes with Zephyrian harmonic patterns and something else entirely, perhaps a new form of communication that only hybrid children could produce. The researchers gathered around, frantically taking notes as the child demonstrated capabilities that existed nowhere else in the known universe. That evening, as the three of them sat in their garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lyralei reflected on how profoundly their world had changed. The experimental plants around them had evolved into something entirely new, species that had never existed before the Institute's botanical teams began exploring agricultural hybrid vigor.
Do you ever regret it?
Marcus asked softly, his hand finding hers in the familiar gesture that had become as natural as breathing.
Leaving the Empire, choosing this life instead of the one you were born to? Lyralei considered the question seriously, watching Elena play with a flowering vine that glowed with bioluminescent patterns inherited from its Zephyrian genetics.
I regret the pain that led to it, she said finally. The years of feeling like a failure, the isolation, the sense that I had no value beyond my reproductive capabilities.
But, the exile itself? No.
It brought me here, to this life, to you and Elena and the future we're building together.
Even knowing what you know now? That you could have returned to the Empire in triumph, that your success could have restored your position in royal society?
Especially knowing that, Lyralei replied with conviction. Royal society would have wanted to control and limit what we've discovered here. They would have tried to use hybrid vigor to strengthen their own genetic lines while maintaining the hierarchies that created the problems in the first place. Here, we're building something completely new, a civilization based on cooperation rather than domination.
Elena chose that moment to take her first independent steps, toddling across the garden path with the determination that seemed to characterize hybrid children.
As she walked, her skin flickered with patterns of joy and discovery, while her laughter filled the air with purely human delight. She's going to grow up in a universe where being different makes you valuable rather than outcast, Marcus observed, scooping up their daughter as she reached his outstretched arms. They all will, Lyralei said, thinking of the hundreds of hybrid children already being born across the galaxy as more species embraced the Institute's findings.
Elena is just the first of a new generation that will know no boundaries, no genetic prejudice, no limitations based on the accident of their birth.
A soft chime from Lyralei's communication device indicated an incoming message from the Institute's administration center. The text appeared as a holographic display, request for consultation from Andromedan Collective. They report 97% reproductive failure rate over last millennium. Seeking guidance on genetic diversity protocols for crystalline-based lifeforms.
The Andromedans, Marcus said with amazement. They're the oldest civilization in the known galaxy. If even they're asking for help with reproduction, then, the Institute's work has implications we're only beginning to understand, Lyralei finished. We're not just solving contemporary problems, we're addressing evolutionary challenges that affect sapient life on a galactic scale.
As night fell over their transformed world, the lights of the Institute complex glittered like earthbound stars. Ships from dozens of worlds continued their approach, bringing scientists, diplomats, and hopeful parents from across the galaxy. Each arrival represented another species choosing cooperation over isolation, diversity over purity. Lyralei looked up at the actual stars, points of light that had watched over countless civilizations rise and fall throughout cosmic history. Soon, those stars would shine down on hybrid children playing in gardens that spanned dozens of worlds. They would illuminate families that bridged species gaps, research teams that included forms of life previously thought incompatible, and political structures based on inclusion rather than exclusion. Princess, Elena babbled, her first clear word a perfect blend of human phonetics and Zephyrian harmonic patterns. Yes, my little star, Lyralei replied, lifting her daughter to look up at the night sky. You are a princess, not of one world or one species, but of all the possibilities the universe contains.
As Elena reached toward the stars with hands that would someday help build an interspecies civilization beyond anything currently imaginable, Lyralii understood that this moment represented far more than personal happiness. It was the beginning of a new chapter in galactic history, one where the greatest strength would come not from purity, but from the beautiful complexity that emerged when different forms of life chose to grow together. The infertile princess had indeed returned with a baby. But, more than that, she had returned with proof that the future belonged to those brave enough to embrace the infinite diversity the universe offered. In the end, what the galaxy had meant as punishment had become the foundation for its greatest revolution. The stars continued their ancient dance overhead, but the universe they illuminated was transforming with every hybrid child born, every partnership formed, every barrier dissolved in the pursuit of a more connected and vibrant civilization. And, at the heart of it all, a former exile had found her true calling not as a preserver of the past, but as an architect of the future.